All right, welcome back for part two. If you didn't see part one, I will include it in the description for this video. In part one, I reviewed evidence and argumentation from the cognitive sciences, biology, and philosophy that cast significant reason for doubt that we have free will. And by extension, that leads to questions like, to what degree should we be rewarded or punished for that which we do, given that that which we do is an outgrowth of biological and socialization factors that we did not control. Perhaps the most dismal part of what I talked about in the last video was that conscientiousness itself is highly heritable. So let's say you have a drawback in some other area, you have some natural shortcoming relative to others. But if you work really hard, maybe you can bridge that gap. But the thing is that working hard takes conscientiousness, right? And even that is highly heritable. And so, that it's a pretty dismal thing, and it can lead to some fatalistic thinking. I addressed that briefly in the last video. But the big thing in the last video was that really everything that is relevant to the degree to which you are successful by your own standards, happy and well regarded by others, everything that feeds into that is based on things you didn't control. Genetic heritability, your early socialization. By the time you start exhibiting control, you are already being driven in your choices by things that you did not control. So as an example of this, in the last video I talked about how I've been on the keto diet for over 3 years now and I rarely cheat. And so I'm super disciplined about this, but that's one way of framing it. But another way of framing it is that the reason I don't eat that cookie is because for every bit of enjoyment I got from eating it, I would get much more self-dissatisfaction from eating it. I would be disappointed in myself, annoyed with myself. It would not be worth it. Like, from a hedonic perspective of maximizing my pleasure and minimizing my pain, usually I should not eat that cookie. And I can't turn this off, right? Like, I can't turn this, I can't just choose to be more relaxed and chilled out. And likewise, we have a lot of people in our society are heavier than they want to be. The people that I actually feel the most bad for are the people that are overweight, are bothered by the fact that they're overweight, but just don't have the conscientiousness, the willpower to address this, right? Because if they had that, then they would soon enough cease to be overweight. Or alternatively, if they were overweight but it didn't really bother them, well, then they'd stay overweight, but they would feel fine about it. The worst case scenario is when you care, like basically you could say you care enough that it bothers the hell out of you, but not enough that you're willing to make the major sacrifices it takes to solve the problem. That's going to leave you in a very uncomfortable, depressing situation very often. Moving on, so the purpose of this video here is to start looking into the policy implications of the very dismal things I spoke about in the last video. And I am going to be taking the views from left and right to do this, and I'm going to make a genuine attempt to be very balanced, which is something I think is often missing in discussion of these kinds of things. So to start off, I'm going to talk about what I think is a very useful way to understand the left and the right and hierarchy that was offered by Jordan Peterson. He talked about this regularly during the earlier years of his fame, and it's super valid, I think. And so the idea basically is, okay, competence-based hierarchies are good. Several reasons. One, there's no more legitimate way to base a hierarchy than on competence. Two, we get the best out of each other, right? We put people in the job, we put the person in the job who's most capable of doing the job, which will result, for example, in better products, better services that the broader market can enjoy and benefit from. And that itself will lead to more, your company will be more competitive if you have the right person in the right role. Your baseball team will be more competitive if you have the right person in the right position. And as an extension of companies and government departments working more effectively, your country will be more competitive internationally. Why? Because, well, they can develop more of their own things, making them more independent from other countries. Two, they have a huge tax base because their companies and corporations are pulling in huge money, which allows the home country to, like, pay for things like social services and military, roads, bridges, other infrastructure, and so forth. There are very good things about competence-based hierarchies, but there are also very real drawbacks. There's no matter how just and fair and uncorrupted your hierarchy of competence is, there will always be a certain segment of people left behind. There will always be like a distribution where like 10% of the people like are so unskilled in this valued ability that they get left behind. There never will not be that. And the second thing is that any hierarchy is prone to corruption, things like crony capitalism, nepotism, all that kind of stuff. And so, per Jordan Peterson, a primary role of the right is in the maintenance of competence-based hierarchies. A role on the left, however, is to represent those who will inevitably be left behind by any hierarchy, no matter how pure and non-corrupted it is. And a role for both is to manage against corruption, which is always ever looming. And so they both serve very valid roles. But however, Peterson talked about how we need a good, strong, sensible left and a good, strong, sensible right. And we need them to be in constant conversation with each other as a means of balancing each other out. Because there are problems when you go too far left and when you go too far right. Let's look into some of the problems of going too far right. If we went too far right, like went really libertarian, like, minimal social safety net, all that kind of stuff, yes, we will be incentivizing the development and application of competence in the service of others, but as mentioned above, we will leave a non-trivial amount of people behind. And this is particularly dangerous in societies like ours, which are super fragmented. Families are not well integrated. Communities are not stable because people move so often. People do not have the built-in communal family social safety nets that they might have had 100 years ago. And so when those people fall between the cracks, because some people absolutely always will, they're going to need some kind of social safety net. And there's lots of reasons why you don't want to let these people fall between the cracks. And like obviously within limitations, like I'm not just saying welfare for anyone who wants it, no conditions, no questions asked, nothing like that. But there's lots of reasons you don't want to leave people behind. First off, there is no one more dangerous than a person who feels resentment and disloyalty to their community, who feels that they have little to nothing to lose. Like, this is the kind of person that, if someone's going to become a terrorist or shoot up a classroom, it's going to be usually a person who thinks these ways, often a person who feels these ways. Next, if you leave these people behind, you lose out on the ability to maximize what they could have provided to the community themselves. Because yeah, they might not have been as good as the average person at certain things, but that doesn't mean that they can't contribute something that's meaningful, that's significant. And like in some cases, this is huge, where it's like, imagine if we did not have public education and maybe 20, 30, 40% of our populations were illiterate and could not do basic mathematics. Right, that would make our companies less competitive, and that would make our countries less competitive too. Our military would be less competitive, government agencies less competitive, our companies would be less competitive, which meant less tax dollars for the government. All of these things would be a problem. And when you put all this together, like a society where there's a lot of social unrest because you have a non-trivial chunk of the population who are just utterly resentful and disloyal to their society and who are not contributing as much as they could, what happens when you start, when your country is maybe having hostilities with another country who is doing a better job of keeping the people happy, of helping their people maximize their potentials and so forth? It's kind of going to make your country, maybe a bit of a sitting duck because you're just weaker in so many politically important ways. And what's more, who's to say that one day you're not going to be down on your luck? That you won't make a costly mistake So, there definitely is reason to want to have social safety nets. And like another way of a really cool philosophical thought experiment that some of you will have heard of, it's called the Rosian veil of ignorance. The idea is that it's a thought experiment, and you think, okay, you don't know who you're going to be born as. You don't know if you're going to be born to a wealthy family, a poor family, or somewhere in between. You don't know if you're going to have the genetics of like an Adonis or like much less ambitious genetic heritage. You don't know what kind of society would you want to live in. I think a lot of people would say that they would want a society that basically is capitalism with a social safety net. So you want the capitalism because you want to incentivize people who are talented to make and to incentivize everyone to use and develop their talents to their best of their ability. You want that. It's more productive and it's better for the country's competitiveness and functioning at most levels, maybe every level. So there's that. But you also don't want to let the people that are less fortunate fall so far behind, because that could be you in this thought experiment, or someone you love, or someone you know. And even if it's not, it's again, there's nothing more dangerous than a person who thinks they have nothing to lose and is very bitter about the society around them. So the left definitely does play valid roles, because we can't forget about that side of the equation. However, there are also problems if we go too far to the left. The left on the whole is far more resistant with respect to hierarchy. They place great importance on equality. They worry that inborn differences and advantages lead to quick injustices. They will ask things that are valid points and questions. Why does the child of a 19-year-old impoverished single mother deserve less opportunity than the child of a pair of doctors? But on the other hand, so these are valid considerations, but on the other hand, what happens if we go too far in flattening society? What if we flatten the income distribution so much that we are not optimizing the incentivization of people to apply their talents as much as they might have if they were not further optimized, thereby in a way taking away the full potential of their productivity away from those around them. Why would a person want a job that has more responsibility, for example, even if they could do it, if the pay increase was not, commensurate with the increased level of challenge that would come from it? So that, if the pay is not significantly higher, then it's going to be hard to fill that role. And what if the role needs to be filled? Another risk of flattening the income distribution too much is that your country can start losing contributors. So in Canada, there's a term, and I'm part of this, it's called the brain drain. And it refers to Canada losing a lot of professionals, especially in the medical fields, to America because the pay tends to be higher down here. Depending on where you go, the cost of living might be lower. And so Canada loses out on this. And that's actually me. I'm an occupational therapist born and trained in Canada, and I've been in the States for, getting on 10 years now. So I'm a part of that. And so that is another risk of flattening things out too much. Another problem that could emerge if left-leaning ideas of compassion and second chances and whatnot, and attributing a person's shortcomings to things always out of their control, which in my previous video I did indicate there's a good reason to believe that they are. If we start thinking that way too much, what if we start saying that a person cannot help that they are prone to addiction, which means that they cannot help that they became addicted to cocaine and thus are not responsible for robbing people to pay for cocaine? What if we start saying that aggression is highly heritable, which it is, and so maybe people guilty of violent crimes really don't deserve to be punished? And so as you can see, there are problems to the left of us, problem to the right of us, and in my opinion, and I think this is I think most people agree with this, because most people they're not either fully right-wing or fully left-wing. They're not either fully libertarian or fully socialist or whatever. Almost all of us are in the middle. It's just that we differ on where we are. Do you dial yourself to 60 or do you dial yourself to 40? It makes a difference, but 60 and 40 is way different than 0 and 100. So why do we need a compromise, a middling position that strives to optimize? Well, it's like we need a social system which incentivizes us to be as useful and good to others as is reasonably possible. And for this reason, things like differential payment for differential work and competence are good constructive things. We also need to protect ourselves against dangerous people within our society and disincentivize dangerous behavior. I don't care what the reason is for a person's aggression. Like, I don't want to be innocently on the other end of it. I don't want to be on the other end of it innocently, like not deserving it. For these reasons, we incarcerate violent criminals in the name of protection and deterrence. But we can't let people fall too far behind. The best social safety nets are generally going to be the organic family and community ones. We should, as I said earlier, be strongly encouraging their development and strengthening. But given that many of us don't have this, even a greatly suboptimal safety net administered by a government is far better than nothing. We also need a literate and mathematically competent population with access to affordable healthcare when needed, so as to maintain the competitiveness of our countries. Further, generally speaking, we need to give people second chances. And so to me, these kinds of considerations point to having a blended capitalist populist type of system. We want a free market where people can choose what paths they pursue and in which they are incentivized through differences of income, for example, to be as productive as possible. But we need to take care of those at the bottom, because if they are not taken care of, then all of society will lose out on what they could offer. And further, as I mentioned, when a person gets to the point where they're so filled with resentment and feel they have nothing to lose, maybe they get to the point where they say, hey, it's time to eat the rich. Taking care of people that are less fortunate, less able, and so forth, that is going to require a disproportionate amount of financial contribution from those of greater means. So basically, I'm talking about here's a progressive taxation system of some sort where the wealthy actually do pay more. However, it's a matter of striking a balance. We don't want to tax them so much that it discourages them and disincentivizes them from being as productive as they could be, or leaving the country for greener pastures and so forth. So it's definitely an issue of balance. And yes, there are valid counter arguments. Like, even if we reduce the ratio of the CEO's pay from like 100 times the worker's pay to 10 times the worker's pay, hey, that's still unfair. One could say, I can't help that I don't have the advantages that allowed that person to get into their position. And on the other hand, another person could say, why should I be forced to pay for someone else's healthcare, for example? How does that fall on me? I worked hard and smart to put myself in a good position. They should have too. And further, it's not like the wealthy would not gain from having, the bottom end of the income distribution supported. For one thing, you don't want to live in a society where you have a whole bunch of people that feel like they have little to live for, that they've been left behind. Like, that's just very, very dangerous. Secondly, if you're wealthy, like maybe you own a business, run a business, or and certainly you disproportionately, like if you got more money, you can shop more, right? Like, don't you want a population of people that are literate and can do basic math, because that allows for better, more competent workers, which can help improve your national security for the reasons I described above. There are certainly benefits to the wealthy of taking care of the less affluent. And now, like the biggest thing is, like, don't put people in a situation where they feel like they have to fight for their lives. Like start engaging in things like robbery and theft or whatnot, or just start feeling so bitter towards their society that they're willing to do things to harm it. That's bad for all of us. But really, we're not going to find a perfect solution here. But that doesn't mean that all solutions are equal. Some will be more optimal than others, and how we define that is going to, my optimality point is probably not going to be the same as yours. And so, yeah, we're going to draw the lines differently. And there's going to be valid perspectives on both sides, but we need both sides of this debate, because each one of them addresses very important considerations, and we need to take them both into account, because otherwise, if we go too far one way or too far the other. It's like we're either risking falling off a cliff to the left of us or off another cliff to the right of us. Not good. So that is my consideration here of like policy implications for the dismal research which casts doubt on free will and thus with its implications for personal responsibility. The next episode I'm going to be doing is going to be talking about why people on the right on average seem to be happier than people on the left. Hope you'll join me.